What's your
What
response to that guy?
what a crusty old bastard.
All right, welcome back. This is the RMSGear Webcast. This is our episode 2. We've been talking about names. I still can't come up with one. You haven't thought of anything, have you?
No, I think we're stuck with a really kind of a dull name, and that's fine with
Dole?
me.
Hey,
Yeah.
I'm going to say this. If somebody sends me a name that I like, I'm going to send them a free pack of cutthroats if we choose
Bam.
their name.
I
So
like it. I like it.
that's a cheap way to try to find a good
Yeah.
podcast name. All right. Welcome back. This is RMS Gear. I'm Tommy, my dad Tom. And this is our third attempt at doing this podcast this morning.
We're still staying
Um,
cheerful.
we're
All the technical
trying to be.
difficulties.
If I wasn't laughing, I'd be crying.
Yeah.
So, anyways, why don't you introduce what we're doing here today, Dad?
Okay, today's going to be a funner day, and it's not the introductory nature of the first one because I get to geek out a little bit as a coach and kind of give some really specific information on part of the shot. We're going to do that every time. We're going to answer a question or two, and we're going to talk about like this. Tommy and I were talking the other day about his son's experience, my grandson's experience on his first elk hunt last fall. And it was vastly different than mine and vastly different from yours because we've had generational knowledge accumulating throughout this last, I don't know, almost 40 years. When I started elk hunting, everything was brand new. I was backpacking with a buddy and taking vacation. We spent 20 days in the field, never saw an elk my first year. Whereas I was showing you guys elk when you were two tiny little dudes, and
Yeah.
you could only walk so far. So one of the little dudes was on my shoulder while we were moving across the terrain to get to look at some elk. And little boys' voices are really good at bugling, and we're gonna have you bugle at elk, and we do it every year when you guys were little. But this little dude next to me is getting tired, man, and so he'd get tired, and off this guy'd come, and off the other one would come, and you and your brother got to look at and hear and see a lot of elk before, when you're 5, 6 years old, for crying out loud. And those are some of my best memories, obviously.
Yeah,
that right after the season time, early October, elk's both seasons done. We're done hunting, but there's still elk around and they're still in the rut. So I got to bring you dudes out and start getting experience when you're real tiny little dudes, man.
Yeah,
Pretty cool.
we got spoiled too when we were young because we got to do some really good elk hunting, and we got to do it a lot because it was kind of close to home.
Yeah.
I never really realized how spoiled we were until I became an adult and I, meet out other people that are really into elk hunting, and especially new customers that come into the store, and they're either guys that came from out east and moved to Colorado, or guys that are just getting into the sport and they're amped to elk hunt because there's a lot of information out there now, and there's a lot of really cool videos out there now. But I kind of feel bad when new guys come into the store, and we've talked about a couple of these guys. Not going to name any names, but guys that are pumped to elk hunt, can't wait to get into it, and their expectations aren't really that realistic. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Like, what's a realistic expectations if you're starting out elk hunting, and how would you even go about it? Because the way you went about it was a lot different from me. Obviously, I had a dad that introduced it to me, and it's even a lot more different than it is for my son. So why don't you talk about your first experiences elk hunting? I would, and maybe you could share some of the stuff that you did with us when we were young, and then I'm going to talk about kind of my perspective and what I see for my son, and then we'll kind of get into after that. We'll kind of get into, geez, how would you even recommend a guy really get into it with a chance of success?
Yeah. During my college years, I hunted with my best buddy on a ranch he lived in near Rifle, Colorado, and so those were rifle hunts in more deer country. And then we had decided along the way we wanted to be bow hunters. We knew that all along. So when I graduated from college, we both bought a bow, and we went to be bow hunters. So he came from a backpacking family, and we just climbed into that country. We were mostly deer hunting in and kind of on the edge of elk habitat. And, between vacations and weekends, we probably spent 20 days in the field. And a lot of that was off of a backpack. Well, not knowing anything about elk and elk habitat and where they are in those vast landscapes, we trudged all over the place. We put a lot of miles in, and we never saw an elk. We heard some bugles in the distance. We saw elk sign. We didn't know where they were specifically at what times of day. We didn't know how to look for them. We didn't know how to get close to them if we could find them. It was a giant learning experience, but we didn't have the expectations of the guys today. We enjoyed our time in the wilderness together. We were best friends. We enjoyed the hardships, the cold, the hot, the sweating, the discomfort. We just enjoyed every part of it. And so we weren't about to quit because we didn't have these expectations of all these Primos videos and the other stuff out there. Um, Interestingly enough, after that first year, like we got to learn more about these animals. But I found a book called The Season of the Elk, or maybe Paul had that book and it had just come out. You just found it after I mentioned this to you. I don't even remember why that long ago. This is like 1976. I even remember the name of that book, but it had an impact because I learned more about elk habits. And then we were digging into the
Is
magazines.
this the one?
Amazing. That is the one. Yeah.
Season of the Elk. That's not even a hunting
76.
book.
No, it was not a hunting book. Published in January 1, 1976, the first year we hunted, where we didn't find any elk. We found that book the next year. I think Paul found that book. But and we were digging into the magazines, Outdoor Lives, the bow hunting magazines, and consuming all of that. But it didn't have that much advice, more kind of hero stories. But anyways, the next year we found elk, and we scared the hell out of a lot of elk, and made.
Did you see any here?
The first year? Didn't see an elk the
Yeah.
first year.
Not one.
Deer, not one.
Okay.
Not one elk. But not having expectations of any kind, it didn't we weren't discouraged like a lot of the guys are now. Goes to one of the things we were talking about. Those first year guys, they'll get maybe one or two encounters that first year. And with those expectations of all the videos they see and all these successful guys and all the information on the internet there is now, it's giantly disappointing to a lot of them.
Yeah.
Or they may have an encounter, or they may have blown a shot, and then they're serious archery students after that. And then they go through a year or two where they don't get that shot. I mean, it's frustrating as all get out. The conditions aren't the same. I mean, we backpacked in a time when nobody backpacked. I mean, you were hunting out of your back of your pickup in a base camp, and you'd hike out of there. Most guys, there were the horse packers. The guys got deep in the wilderness, but there weren't many guys backpack hunting. It was kind of a weird thing. I mean, my buddy's family backpacked to fish a lot, and they just liked the experience of backpacking. So I kind of got in on born at the right time. There were a lot of elk in Colorado and not much hunting pressure from bow hunters to begin with. And then we were backpacking, so we got isolated. We never ran into anybody else. Vastly different from your experience right off the get-go. Now, go to your generation. I had 10 or 15 years of elk hunting under my belt, had killed silver elk by the time you started. So we got into that, we had a place close to home with the in-laws place that lived in elk country, and which I had already had 10, 15 years. Actually, before I really started bow hunting, I was in that country and hiking around. So by the time you and your brother got started, my gosh, you'd have years of experience in that country hiking around with me too, and calling it elk in your little boy's voice that are perfect for elk bugling, vastly different experience. And you saw elk and had encounters the first year you had a bow in your hand. Much different experience back then, and still not a crowded area. It wasn't a draw unit at the time. Still wasn't crowded. So really, really kind of also born in a generation where you got to experience a lot of great bow hunting. The guys coming in now, there are those opportunities. You're going to have those opportunities to get into elk, but there are a lot of other guys on the landscape with you. So vastly different now, different experience.
Yeah. I think that we got to experience like the tail end of the.
Yes.
Well, I know that we did because even after we graduated college, those first 5-7 years after college, we never saw anybody. And if we did, it was like, hey, right on, man. If you're back here, I know you're as serious as we are.
Yeah,
that
and
changed
they were
really fast.
They were kind of knowledgeable guys back there. I mean, when you were in college and I brought you backpacking to our old haunts on the western slope with Paul, But we got
Yeah.
into a lot of elk, and we didn't run into other bow hunters, did we?
No,
It
no
was
one else
awesome.
back there.
So I'd say that the expectations are so high from all the content out there from elk hunters. It's really discouraging to that new guy. I mean, and my advice, I guess, would be to, you know, you've got to learn the terrain really well, and the information on the habits of the elk, and feeding bedding patterns, and you know what part of the landscape to look in is out there for guys. And then, my gosh, Google Earth has been amazing tool. We were always working on paper topo maps and had to learn to navigate that way. You've got all the GPS information. It's virtually impossible to get lost now. You've got electronic devices to help you out. So uh, bigger thing, more access to information, but more access to information by everybody. So you're going to have company back there for sure. And you got to adapt some hunting methods also. And we'll talk about that. And in future episodes, we're going to talk about the biggest mistakes elk hunters make. But today we're kind of focused on this difference in the generations of elk hunters, from my generation to yours, to your son, who just had his first elk season last fall, and some of his
Yeah.
experiences, which are
Yeah.
really kind of fun to talk about.
It is cool. So it's funny because, and I've heard you tell the story in the past that the first year you didn't see an elk, and then the second year, what did you see? Like an elk's rear end as it was running over the hill.
No, we actually
Something you
encountered a lot
said.
of elk, but yes, they're mostly the rear ends going away.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
we spooked a lot of elk.
Yeah. And I had the benefit of, I mean, for one, we got to grow up in elk country, right? My dad
Yes.
was an elk hunter. And I had just mentioned this to you before. We had some technical difficulties, but I'm going to tell the story again.
Hmm.
I remember very well when I was young, I had a set of surgeries on my feet, and I was in some walking casts for a time. And so one of the first memories that I have, going out behind my grandparents' house, and there was some elk bugling, and so we're trying to catch up to them, and these walking casts that I had couldn't get wet, and there was a little boggy area. And so
Yeah.
you went through it, and then my brother Dan went through it, and I was standing on the other end of this little boggy area, and I was about to cry because it's like I can't keep up. I'm about to go jump in here because I don't care about my casts. I want to keep up. And you turned around and you saw me. So you came back and you grabbed me and threw me on your shoulders, and we went, and I actually got to see a couple of raghorns fighting. So that was my
Yeah.
first memory. I don't know if I was 5 or 6
I think
when.
5, and if you were in cast, you were at the tail end of 4 or 5. You were a little dude, man.
Yeah, I mean, I was old
Well,
enough to remember it. A pretty
it
good
hurts
memory.
my heart that I went a hunt without you, and it makes me feel warm to remember putting you on my shoulders and carrying you towards those elk.
Yep.
It's a
But
cool memory. Yeah.
so either way, I mean, I got to have that experience from as early as I can remember chasing
Yeah.
elk.
Yeah. Yeah. We had some
Yep.
great times. Those are warm memories for me for sure.
And then
Yeah.
our first season hunting, I mean, my first several seasons where I actually got to carry a bow in my hand,
Hmm.
the woods were still not crowded enough to
No.
where every morning as the sun came up, we'd throw a bugle out, and it wasn't like, where are we going to
Mhm.
go? It was more like, which bull sounds the hottest, which one's
Yeah.
the closest,
I
you
knew the
know?
terrain really well by then, knew the elk patterns in that terrain. So right off the get go, I'd get us out there. We might be walking in the dark for a half hour, an hour to get to where I knew the elk were going to be that morning, but got you guys right on elk right away, which was really cool, really fun.
Yeah, right off the bat, got to make every mistake I think you could
Hmm.
make 10
Uh-huh.
times in our
Yeah.
first couple years hunting,
Yeah.
And then so now that's changed now that my son, because he had his first season this year, right? So, and you correct me if I'm wrong,
Hmm.
but what I remember back then when we first started hunting is, we had a really good general idea of where the elk are going to be at different times of the day, right? We
Hmm.
knew where their feeding areas were, we
Hmm.
knew where their bedding areas were. I remember that being very mysterious, right? We'd run into an elk in this spot at this time of the day, but that meant nothing to me at that time,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
Um, I wouldn't say that we really had much calling strategy back then. Not that I
Hmm.
really remember. I mean, we keep them talking, we try to move in close, but that's about as far as I remember really taking it.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, I was talking strategy, and I know Danny was paying attention.
Oh yeah.
Because I would tell them why we're going to a certain spot when and what I observed from past years. By that time, my gosh, I'd had 20 years in that terrain. And just by experience, just by seeing elk in the same spot and thinking about it and like, okay, these guys are moving from that area where they're moving down to in the evening and they're moving through here later in the morning. And there's these spots where these aspen ridges where they're feeding all night. And we might, if we can get in there dark, encounter them there. But if we missed them there, we got to catch them on this ramp on the other side of the ridge because they're still milling around and feeding. And we got a chance, a little later in the morning. But if we don't catch those there, we can book it a couple of miles down the country because these guys are moving further and they're going to hit this one funnel a little later in the morning. So we'd have a hunt route and with timing planned out for, from before sunrise until, through those times when those elk are moving through other parts later in the morning. Okay.
Yeah, I know Dan was paying a lot more attention to that than I was. He had a knack. These things came a lot more natural to him, and we'll
I
probably get
think
into some of those details.
he was the most interested in hunting and fishing, and you were your primary interests were wrestling. I mean,
It's
that was
always been that way. Yeah,
it's always been that way. You have a mind for wrestling in that sport as a competitor and as a coach like no one I've ever known. Well, Dan has a mind for hunting and fishing.
well, I mean, it affected
like
even where we chose to go to college, right? I went to Wisconsin so I could wrestle in the Big Ten. Dan went to Wyoming so he could keep elk hunting.
Exactly. Right. And so, what you're really interested in, geeked out about is different for different people. And so it's probably why, and Dan to this day is at his age is, I don't know many of this killed as many elk or been successful in the outdoors as Dan. It's been his primary focus his whole life. And he is a geek about it and he's analytical about it like you are in the wrestling realm.
And so that's what I was going to say is the difference. The difference that my son got to experience this year with his first ever elk season.
Yeah.
It was almost, my memories back then it was just kind of feel. We were just kind of out there chasing elk, having fun, but it's much more calculated now. And so I'm going to give kind of two examples of how it's different for us now. And maybe we can glean some advice out of this for some guys that are new into the sport. So,
and maybe a little discouraged.
And maybe discouraged. Yeah. So anyways, my son had his first elk season. I think he got 3 shots. I know he got too amped up a couple times, hit a branch, made a good shot on one of them, hit a branch, which is bound to happen. But Dan had taken my son out and they spotted some elk on a ridge. And Dan knew where the elk were likely to be, right? Where they were was not really possible to get up on those elk. So they made a half-mile circle around these elk and got in front of them. And they were creeping up this game trail. And then the elk, just like clockwork, were coming right down the game trail. And there was a couple cows ahead and the bull in the back. So Dan told my son, John, go get behind that rock. Dan dropped back, gave a couple cow calls, and that elk walked right to my son. Would have ran him over,
Big bull.
And so that was very calculated. He knew the area. He knew the game trails. He knew where those elk were going to move to. And they made a giant, huge circle to get around those elk.
Lost complete contact with those elk for quite a bit.
20, 30 minutes of no contact with those elk.
To get to a spot where Dan, because of his knowledge of the terrain, calculated correctly where they're going to be.
Yep.
It took a lot of years for Dan to learn that.
A lot of years. We didn't do anything like that. But when we were young, we would have just kind of gone straight at them, right? Or stood right there and bugled at them, thinking that they're just going to come right into a call.
Yeah, we made a lot of those mistakes.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
And so then here's another example of a much more calculated, a way that we're more calculated now. I'm hunting with my son. This is I don't know, a week later or so. And we're hanging out in a saddle. And we've got a bedding area that's kind of down the hill from us, a feeding area that's above us. And this is early afternoon. So we were trying to catch those elk milling around, not to their feeding area yet, but milling around, but kind of between those two places. And so I gave out a real tiny squeal, nothing threatening, and we got a response from a bull. And so I gave him what Chris Rowe would call an assembly mew. And an assembly mew, off topic, but Chris Rowe really put a lot of stuff together for us, really changed our elk hunting.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave this bull an assembly mew, and I heard him start to wheeze. And the few times I've heard that in the past, it was when they were marching in. So I was like,
Mm-hmm.
buddy, get ready. He's coming. And that elk walked 5 yards away from us and stood behind a tree in the only spot that my son couldn't get a shot, of course. Right. And then got suspicious because he didn't see anything and then turned and walked away. But I say that was calculated because of the spot we were in at the time that we were there and the
Mm-hmm.
specific call that I gave that bull, knowing what he was most likely to react to, right? It's not like I just guessed and threw out a bugle or just gave a random cow call. It was a particular call that
Mm-hmm.
elk
You
responded
located him first, and you gave him the call that would get him to walk to you.
to. Right. So yeah, that's a pretty big difference from how I started hunting to now
Mm-hmm.
how my son is hunting. And of course, we
Mm-hmm.
explained to him, he knew everything that we were doing. And he's got a pretty good mind for the sport or for hunting
Yeah,
in
he's a
general, I
smart
should say.
young man. Yeah, he's a smart boy.
Yeah. So,
For
man,
sure.
what an advantage he's going to have even over what I had. And I had a
Yeah.
tremendous advantage over like what you had.
Yeah, and John's such a thinker. When you give him these calculations that we make, these intentional moves, and where we're
Right.
going at what time we're to be there, he's going to learn a lot. He
Yep.
doesn't have to experience that he can apply later to learn about the terrain he's in and what he sees when.
Exactly. So we get so many guys that come into the store amped to elk hunt, can't wait to get going about it. And
Yeah.
they're like, "Hey, do you have any advice for me?" And it's kind of like, "Yeah, I have a lot of advice for you. I
We
don't
do.
even know where to begin."
We love to share that too.
Absolutely, but geez, how do you replace experience? You
You
know,
can't, and that it boils down to spending a lot of time in the same areas, or a lot of years and a lot of time, and learning from and putting that in the memory bank every time you encounter elk, because you're going to see some patterns within those encounters as far as times and places go. Caveat to that is, you go into a drainage well, and you know these patterns, and you spend some time in a drainage, for instance, but you're putting a lot of scent in there, you're encountering some elk, and there is a certain time frame, just like you put scent on the ground. That old whitetail buck, if you're walking in and your approach to your tree stand isn't good and he catches the presence of humans in that area, he's going to vacate. And elk will do that too. You're only going to get a certain amount of time in a drainage on a particular herd of elk. And if you bump them, it's all over. You might as well go and find another place. So the advice is, find 2 or 3 interconnecting drainages, and you get to know that terrain really well. And you're filing all this data of when and where and what time of year and everything else. And over the years, you're going to have the information available to start planning your hunts better.
and that's what I would say that piggybacks right off of that, is to cover ground, right? Don't beat a dead horse. Don't hang out where there's no elk.
No,
If you got
it
your
takes
sight set on a beautiful valley and that's where you want to hunt, I mean,
Yeah.
how many guys pick a place because it's beautiful and it looks elky, and then they stay there for their week-long hunt, but there's no elk? You'd be better off hiking back to camp, no matter how far it is, driving to a new place and hoofing it back into a new spot to try to find some elk.
Once you put the boot leather in to know there's elk present or not, and there's not elk present, it's time to make a move. It goes under the title I call beating a dead horse, because I've done it a lot. Man, we're into elk up to our ears at first, and then it diminishes the second day, third day, and then nothing. And then we're staying in the same general area, and we're putting still some miles into that same general drainage or area, and we're wasting our time. We should have bumped a ridge. And gone into another drainage and looked there.
Yep. You got to
and
keep
then put the
moving.
boot leather in. Yeah.
So, what about calling advice? What would you tell a new guy that's just getting into it? What would you tell him for calling?
Okay, I would say invest in something like row hunting resources with elk hunting. And, like that's some crucial data. I mean, we can talk about stuff like that too, but it's hard to, in a short podcast, to give real good advice. Joel Turner's got some cool stuff out there when he's talking about, when to bugle. I mean, here's a couple things. A lot of times we'll go out at midnight, right? And we'll throw some bugles out and see what's where. And we'll try to find a responding bull because, sometimes in the heart part of the early seasons, they're not bugling much during the day at all. We just got to know where they're at. I mean, when the elk get vocal, at least we can find them because we can hear where they're at. But middle of the night, you're probably going to get some responses. They're probably in a feeding area. They're going to probably be there all night. And so at least you got a starting point for the morning. Some general things that cow calls are awesome. But if you've got a herd bull and you're right on the edge of a herd and you're going to cow call, it's not generally successful to get a bull because he's got cows mewing all around him. But if you are very close to his cows and bugle at that herd, short, crisp bugle, that bull is likely going to, he's got a threat now to all these cows and he's got to run you off. So if you're really close to the cows and you can bugle at that herd, short, crisp bugle, he's got to move you away. If you're bugling from a herd bull and a bunch of cows, you've got some distance, he's going to move his cows away from you. So there's that distancing. There's like general advice like that you'll learn a lot about. But the stuff that's the advantage to Chris Rowe's stuff and the Rowe Hunting Resources stuff is he tells you kind of like what sound to make when. You don't want to make a sound that's not consistent with what they're doing at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go into all that because I would slaughter what Chris's advice might be. I give you advice from our experiences, but I think I'd start right there. There's so much online information, but that's really good information. It's certainly added to what we do. This, like calling close to a herd bull, that information Joel puts out and he'll give it to anybody. It's probably out there a lot. He calls it a bull calling cows bugle or something like that. Because he observes the type of bugle they make when they're circling their herd. I've cow called close to herds and had those things move away. It was a big mistake. If I'd have bugled instead, probably had the bull run us over. I've given that advice to customers. Guy came in, he says, I can get on these cows every day. But I cow call and they move away. And I don't know what to do, but I know where they're at. You got some advice for me when I go back. And it was kind of like on Turner's advice. I said, yeah, I do have some advice. You might throw a bugle out and locate that herd. And then your job is to throw a long cow call out. Maybe he'll bugle at it so you can kind of keep locating, but then get as close to those cows as possible. And I'll kind of quote Joel on this. I said, throw that short, crisp bugle out there and then have an arrow knock because you better be ready because that bull's got to run you off. And anyway, the guy comes back to the shop, followed that protocol, threw an bugle at that elk. That elk screamed all the way from the other side of the herd, right past him, and he shot him quartered away. And of course, he walked back into the shop to tell me the story. And it's like, yes. I mean, that's not an uncommon experience for us now in our elk hunting. It was really cool. There are times and places where bugles call single bulls in. It used to happen a lot to us in our country. Remember when we were packed up there in northwest part of the state and we got a bull bugling Tommy, and we noticed that if we bugled, he'd bugle, and he'd bugle back closer than the last one. Remember that? You and I went on a short backpack trip, and we ran up the thing, ran towards that bugle again. He bugles back closer. Like, this dude's coming in and he's coming to bugles. Now, I've had that happen a lot of times. Anyway, we moved up, and you said we hit up a little hill that had a bench, just a small little rise that hit a bench. You said, Dad, get up there and I'll stay back here to call for him. And I ran up on that bench and I said, I better be looking because this thing might be closer than we think.
Oh,
and
this
sure
is
enough,
fairly recent.
Yeah,
this
was
was
like 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay, I was trying to think
5 years ago, right?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I'm standing up there going, don't call, because he was walking straight at us. And so I started dodging from tree to tree to get in his line of approach. He was approaching us, but we're a little off angle. So I went tree to tree using the terrain to get in. And then I was set, man. He was going to walk by me right to my left within 20 yards. He was kind of coming up toward me still. And we kind of lost contact for a bit because I was out of your sight and you didn't know how close this bull was, and you threw out a call. And it's like, dang, if we'd have had a way to communicate, it would have been awesome, but we didn't because we were out of sight. I could have said, zip it up or something. Probably our mistake, right? The only one we probably made, because you didn't make a mistake by calling. You hadn't heard anything for a while. But that bull put on the brakes, and now he started circling. So he's in range, basically, it was 30 yards, and starts circling to scent check you. And as he was circling, I'd come to full draw and waiting for the opening. He'd get in the opening, he'd jump across the opening. Like, dang it, I'd let down. He's coming up to another opening. I'd get to full draw, waiting in the opening, and he would jump through the opening before I could make a sound to stop him. And he finally got off angle enough to get eyeballs or get something on you that it was suspicious about, and jumped out of there. And dang it, I tried to make a noise to stop him, didn't work out. And that one ended. But man, that was a cool little encounter that Murphy's Law does apply to elk hunting. Anything that bad can't happen will generally happen. Murphy was just working a little too well that day, but we had a cool encounter. Unusual calling event now, unless you're in remote areas. When we were in Wyoming the season before this one, man, bugles would call the bulls in. And you called a nice bull in for me, and I actually got that bull. But anyway, I digress. So calling, kind of observed what didn't work when. I mean, you got to try it. Some tactics we use, we'd let the elk settle for a while. We'd get under a ridge where we had the wind right, and we try to call a bull off of a ridge with cow calls or little squeals. This worked for us quite a bit. We've had a lot of little things like that we're always willing to talk to guys in the shop about. But anyways, I would rather have a guy invest in like a row hunting resources and get the full stories and some deep information on elk behavior. It's just awesome.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend Chris Rowe's elk hunting course. When we first watched that, everything he said correlated with all of my experiences. And so I bought in right away. And then since then, we were doing a lot of stuff by now, but he even as really kind of seasoned elk hunters, he definitely added to our game for sure. Definitely added to it. Yep. Mm-hmm. And explained some situations that I didn't understand. And he gave me an explanation of what was going on there. So as far as explanations to some of the stuff we were doing that didn't work, we stopped doing, but at least we understood why it didn't work. Exactly. Yeah, that's definitely true.
Cool. Wasting all those opportunities. Yeah.
Well, I think we should move into our next segment, which is going to be shooting advice. So I'm going to play a quick word from our sponsor, which is us, and then we'll jump into to our next segment.
Great.
I'm Tom Klum, owner and founder of Rocky Mountain Specialty Gear. Welcome to our shop. Come browse probably the world's largest inventory of traditional bows in one store. We probably have 400 to 600 bows in here at any given time. Or you can set yourself up with a compound bow. We have just about every major brand. We welcome all experience levels. I don't care if it's your first bow or you're an old timer and you might be buying your 30th bow. We can serve your needs. Everybody that works here is a USA certified archery coach. One of the things we like is value added, so if you need some improvement on your shot, please ask us for that. We are the home of Solid Archery Mechanics, cutthroat broadheads, and we have our own leather line that we manufacture in-house, like arm guards and quivers. We also offer a large line of different hunting products like Sitka clothing, high-end backpacks, high-end boots, optics including Swarovski. We've got a great knife shop here, and we're an elite dealer for Benchmade. Come check us out in Wheat Ridge, Colorado for all of your archery and hunting needs.
I laugh every time I see that video. I play it on purpose.
Me too. I don't work well off of script.
Yeah. All right. So for our shooting segment today, we're going to talk about string torque. I'm going to let you introduce this because it's kind of your deal here.
For more experienced shooters, I kind of like to add stuff in that's very common in a guy's shot. That is an easy correction for some, and so this is based off of a post I put on Instagram very recently under the Tom_Klum_senior Instagram account. I think we put it on the Rocky Mountain account too. But it's a fairly common thing, and it popped up again in the shop with a guy who his arrow tune all of a sudden was terrible. The guy, Danny, helped bear shaft tune some arrows for him. He's a real decent shooter, but string torque crept into his shot and some improper direction of tension. But the string torque blew up the arrow tune, and we're going to go over this video. Tommy's can like go frame by frame in some instances, and then I'll show you the correction. It was a simple correction we made to get rid of string torque, and then we cleaned up how he was finishing his shot too. But so there's kind of a double whammy here of good information to go over, and I can kind of go over how this kind of stuff creeps into your shot too. But Tommy, first of all, is going to play maybe just 2 segments out of a 5 or 6 segment Instagram post that I had on string torque, and then what we're going to do is play the video of this guy's shot and break it down and show how this string torque shows up in real life, string torque in action type of thing, and then talk about corrections to this man's shot we made, so we can geek out a little bit. And I think there's a lot to learn from the videos we're going to show you pretty quick. So you want to play that, Tommy? You want to play that? The 2 of the 5 or 6 segments of the string torque is an introduction kind of from the Instagram post. About hook and what we're doing with hook and how we're creating a twisting effect or a torque from incorrect string pressure. So first of all, I just want you to look at what a good hook should look like. The wrist should be fairly straight, slight outward bend to the wrist. We're going to keep flexion of the string fingers forward. We're going to keep flexion of the thumb and the pinky backwards. So we're going to have extension, and flexion. Flexion here with the thumb and pinky. And we're going to kind of lock that hook position in. So in an archery shot, we need to take that hook, that shape, that hook. We need to have it all set up at the set position. We're going to bring it up here to set up. And when we come into anchor, we've got to keep that position. The main source of torque for recurve, guys, is the angle of your hand right here. So if I leave this pinky outward, and trust me, this is the most natural feeling place to have your hand, like if you use an index finger with a compound. But when we twist this in here, it doesn't feel as natural. So it's something you got to pay attention to. And if you don't, you'll end up with a torque that I'm going to describe here coming up. So if we leave any angle like this, I want to show you the effect that it has on the string. So I'm going to leave that pinky out or a little bit. So if I'm going to coach this out of somebody, it's really a simple fix. All we got to do is take that pinky in towards the neck until you kind of hit an end of range of motion there. You'll see the string straighten right out. The other thing that you will feel is you'll feel the pressure come off of that bottom finger and really load into that middle finger or top 2 fingers. So we're just aligning that back of that hand with the string. Okay, now we're going to get to see this torque in action. We had a guy come into the shop who Danny had bear shaft tuned some arrows for him for his hunting bow, and all of a sudden one day his arrows weren't flying good. So he shot a bear shaft, and then when he shot his bear shaft, I mean, they were railing off really like a stiff indication. Point left, they were railing to the left. Point left, knock right, like a massive stiff arrow. And he like completely confused, like, Tom, can you help me? Like, sure, see what's going on. And so like first shot, I didn't really pick it up. And I said, let me get my camera out. So I got my phone behind him, and we were able to slow this down and pick out exactly what was going on. What you're going to see in this video is you're going to see the torque in action. There was also another problem in his shot. He was basically, his direction of tension to a follow through was incorrect and it creeped into his shot. So throw that video up, Tommy. Let's take a look at that.
Yeah, you bet. You're saying that the string torque caused his arrows to come out stiff?
Correct.
That's what turned you on to the string torque?
Stiff. Well, yeah. I mean, that's generally a place I look when we had a good bear shaft tune, like perfect bear shaft tune, straight down the middle, and all of a sudden we didn't. And so I knew it was him. You know what I mean? So I had to look at his shot. I looked at one shot and I got a quick look and like, yep, that's way stiff. All right. But I wasn't looking at him. So I got my cell phone out, and then I videoed him from this angle so I could look for torque. So let's go ahead and watch the video in full speed once, Tommy. Go ahead and just proceed through. And we got this shot that looks like that. Well, I can see that because I'm looking at him now, what the problem was right away. But then for him, what we did was we slowed this video down. So we had two issues. Let's deal with the torque first. Okay, now it's a slower version and slower version. A lot of you are picking up what's going on already if you were looking at his string hand. So let's focus in on a string hand, Tommy. Let's go frame by frame now on the next one. So let's get here.
Am I looking at his pinky right here?
Yeah, that's right where we want to look. We want to look at the angle of his hand as the release proceeds. See, all right, go back again and just frame by frame. Now let's just go one frame so you can see the twist. Bam, right there, go back and forth. See the twist in his hand, and then go one frame further, and then one frame further. And by the time he gets to here, his hand is almost perpendicular to his face, kind of like I was talking about in the Instagram post, where this feels natural. He hadn't twisted that in. So now I know it's string torque. Now you can see it also. There's a silencer on a string on that first video. Go ahead and put that pointer on that silencer, Tommy. Right there. I want you to watch the silencer frame by frame and watch it jump to the right. Move your little indicator just a little bit away from it now so we can see it. Now watch that silencer tweak to the right a couple times. Now watch the top limb. You'll see it twist to the left. You'll see it torque to the left. Bam. You see that torque? As soon as that string starts going through his fingers, and we're going to have a giant S-curve off of that thing too. But anyways, you see the torque get right into the bow from the twist in his hand, resulted in a twist in the bow right there. And so that string's moving to the right side from the center of the limbs and shoving that arrow forward and into his shelf and slamming that, and it's railing off into a very stiff appearing shaft. A terrible result. So from here, I mean, like on that video, what we were really focused on was the string torque and the torque that it produced in the bow. Okay.
But you've got a lightweight bow with you right there, right?
Yeah.
Would you mind showing me?
Yeah, let's look at that because it was in that Instagram video, but I didn't think the string was real clear. But with this bow here at an angle, and you can kind of get my angles right, Tommy, so that a fella could see the bend in the string. Maybe it's contrasting in my shirt enough. So if I'm leaving this hand out, this feels very natural. This doesn't. The fact is, once we set our hook, we've got to take that pinky in. But if we leave it out a little bit, this is the result. Let me move this away from my body or maybe a background. Can you see the bend in the string?
Yep.
Like there's a string going from the top, and then the bottom string is far outside of that. And the correction, I'll do it away from my anchor, away from my face, is to twist that pinky in towards the string, kind of like to where it's almost to an end of range of motion. They're just twist it in. Can you see the string straighten out now? From here, take the pinky in towards the neck. You get a good view on that string, Tommy.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about. So when that release is made, now that twist also puts a ton of pressure on this bottom finger, which exaggerates everything. So when this guy was pulling through his release, he's twisting the string even more because he was pulling through his release with a shoulder pull, incorrect direction of tension. So it was exaggerated by that. So we not only corrected this, which was a very easy correction, but we also corrected the direction of tension, so to speak. The direction of tension, let me spin the other way, that we're looking for a direction of tension like this. Get away from my chair a little bit, get in line with the camera a little more. We're looking for a direction of tension like this, not like this. We don't want to be pulling with our shoulder towards, like I'm pulling towards the camera right now. The target would be down there. I don't want to pull in the opposite direction of where I'm shooting. I want to be pressing scapular retraction this way, because the difference in what it looks like is this that slams to a stop and causes an impingement in your shoulder, or this that rotates through cleanly to a beautiful follow through. I can kind of demonstrate what it looks like with a stretch band. You saw it in action on that fella's video, but you can see it in action anyway. We demonstrate, this is the way I demonstrate it in the shop. As we come into here, and now everything is pressed back. Come into anchor, transfer. That release is going to look like this. If I'm shoulder pulling, I'm going to be pulling this way. Now I can have movement here. This one's at end of range of motion. The shot breaks from right there, and we have a follow through. This one can be, we can change the draw length with this pull, but I'll go ahead and pull through that, and you'll see my elbow slammed to a stop. I had a little back into that one. That one causes injury. Let me look at it from the back. Here's the incorrect pulling towards the camera. It's going to slam to a stop. This one, everything's going behind me to full scapular retraction. I'm just pressing back against an end of range of movement, through that end of range of movement to a follow through. Vastly different results. Vastly different results on not hurting your shoulder. So does that make sense? Do you think I explained that clearly, Tommy?
Yeah, I think so. So how does a guy diagnose this in himself? And then is it just as simple as pulling your pinky in? I mean,
it's as simple as pulling your pinky in. It's literally as simple as that. You know, here's how you pick that stuff up right here. You get your buddy or your girl or whoever your partner is to get behind you in that angle I showed you, and you can see a lot. If you see that elbow flying right towards your camera string, we know we have incorrect direction of tension. If we see that elbow slicing through here and that hand staying in a linear path, you know you've got your direction of movement or tension correct. But there's a diagnosis right there. So for this fella, I mean, I first of all, we squared up the hook and got that simple correction made, and then we kind of went over a direction of tension thing, and I had him stroke a stretch band a couple times. And then we had another customer. I said, I got to check back in with you. I went and helped another customer, and by that time, you know, I got finished with that customer. He was walking out, and he's like, Tom, this is great. He goes, my bear shafts are all like right down the middle, just like when Danny tuned them. And thank you, you know. And it was really cool to be able to help him with this, and it was kind of handy. It's like, okay, this will make a good Instagram post because it's common. It creeps into my shot. And as on the Instagram post, I talked about how it crept into my shot, this torque, and how it was moving. I was having bad left and right groups and made this correction. All of a sudden, everything was in the middle. So you can look at the whole post, and it's just a kind of reiteration. I did a little analysis on that film too in the Instagram post, but you got the information now. So super common thing. There's a post a couple back where we talked about torque from improper grip and squeezing the bow. So that's available on the Instagram accounts also. So really helpful stuff, really little stuff that can creep into your shot. I also, if you know back tension and you're shooting back tension, I also want to talk about how it creeps into your shot. Basically, when we're running a good shot, we are pressing tension from the end of range of movement through the string to a follow through. This activity creates a release generated from the subconscious. But what happens when all the muscles that drive that direction of tension are too fatigued and your brain knows that you have to move through the string, what the brain through neuroplasticity does is just grabs muscles elsewhere to help with the motion. So what it does is it grabs muscles from the back of the shoulder or the shoulder to get that thing through the string. And all of a sudden, we can't do it this way. So it grabs a little help up here, and we start getting through the string with a little help this way, as opposed to this way. And then we repeat that because we're tired, but we want to keep shooting. And then we imprint a neural pathway to this one. Next time you go shooting, this is what shows up first. So that's the way like form changes or degradation in form happens. It's just because we get tired and we keep trying to produce the movements, but then the brain kind of grabs muscle groups elsewhere that changes angles, changes the movement, and you don't really notice it because it happens a tick at a time. And then next time you shoot, that's the way you shoot, and nothing's working right. And you're going, what the heck's going on? And then a correction has to be made. We need to imprint the right movement again, repeat until that's imprinted. So that's kind of an overflow, how that stuff creeps into your shots. So advice being, when you're too tired to shoot your shot perfectly, hang the bow up. That understandable, Tommy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any questions that you would come up with or further explanation needed?
Is the back tension related to the string torque? Like, does string
No,
torque?
that's actually a good question.
Was that just two things that this same guy had?
Absolutely great question. It is basically two separate issues, because old target archery, it used to be like called power archery. It was a push-pull system. And under a push-pull system without string torque, he could have produced accuracy and a good bear shaft result. But he's definitely going to produce an impingement to his shoulder eventually too. That dude was really fit and really muscular, and he wasn't getting pain because I asked him, and that is very common too. But as soon as we get a little injury or atrophy because of a lack of activity or a little age like me, and those tissues aren't as strongly supported, that could show up. He may just have a big gap between the head of the humerus and the acromion process, and really not be crushing those tissues. Another guy might have a small gap in those, just the way he's built, and that thing shows up in a day or a week or two. We're all kind of different in that, but it's something to worry about. That impingement is basically when we slam to a stop, the head of this upper arm bone slams into a little bone that goes over the top of it called the acromion process, is part of your scapula, and they slam together. Well, there's tendons and nerves and tissue in that gap, and you slam that together from incorrect technique enough times, you get inflammation that you're going to get sore here, and then that inflammation gets chronic, and then you build a bone spur, and then that bone spur lacerates one of those tendons coming through. Usually the supraspinatus gets lacerated as far as an archery related injury, sometimes the biceps tendons, but that's kind of an explanation for somebody that's more familiar with physiology, and I don't even need to do it. All I need to do is tell you it's bad. So we want to avoid that slam to a stop or that direction this way when we're pulling through the string to a follow through. The tension, the direction tension has to be behind you. Everything needs to be pressed this way, which creates an end of range of movement, which we press through that end of range of movement to a follow through. Basic advice. From that right there, you can improve your shot, though. I guarantee it. So cool. That's our, I would say, geek out form related stuff that we wanted to do today. Sometimes, Tommy, you and I are like, what should we talk about today? And we have a problem because there's so much we can talk about. It's not finding a subject, it's like picking which one. And this was pertinent because I just happened to put an Instagram post based on a guy that walked in the shop and I had video of. So I think it worked out well for today's little shooting segment.
Yep, it's never ending.
It's never ending. Yeah, we got good stuff for you guys and a lot of stuff coming up.
Cool. All right, I'm going to gather my notes. I'm going to play another word from our sponsor here and gather my notes. And okay. I think we got a couple of questions to go over.
Perfect.
So we'll be right back. Conscious mind can only drive one activity at a time. The activity it needs to be driving at the end of your shot is increasing tension. Anytime our mind moves away from increasing tension to release the arrow, it's not thinking about tension,
and it creates really bad things in your shot. 1/8 of an inch in a little cave-in your front arm causes, believe it or not, 4 to 8 inches of a miss at 20 yards. So you can imagine what it is at 30 to 40. After 6 years of mental anguish trying to figure out an idea how to put a release trigger in the grip that was actually activated by increasing tension, we came up with this little idea. Pressure activates a both tactile and audible click. Because I don't care who you are, you're going to get over-involved in aiming. When you get over-involved in aiming, you're not thinking about how to finish your shot. This little thing promotes the idea of shooting a shot into increasing tension to a follow-through position. It's that simple. That is cool. The one thing about that ad that I wish I'd have worded differently, increasing string tension, would have been a clarification. I had a guy says, I'm trying not to be tense with my life. Nah, that's not what I mean. I'm talking about increasing string tension, which derives tension also that gathers in the grip, which activates our grip trigger, which activates our subconscious release. That's where we're going with that. But it kind of is a cool thing because there were some points in there that leads to the question that I picked out for today. And, you know, I'll kind of read it. A fella.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm throwing a curveball at you. I played that ad on purpose because I've got a question that I did not tell you ahead of time.
Okay. All right. Let's have it. Yeah.
All right. This is a YouTube comment in response to that video of the grip trigger. And the grip trigger deserves its own episode. This guy says, just another way to denaturate and screw up the essence of archery experience. If you are not physically and mentally able to shoot a damn bow, just don't do it. Go play golf or something. Archery is supposed to be a mean of evolution and self-improvement, of elevating your own being as a whole. But someone always seems to find new ways to transform it into a robotic video game experience. What's your response to that guy?
What a crusty old bastard.
See, I chose it because I'll give you my response. I get these guys.
Me at all.
Right? I get these guys. I
get it.
And hear me out. Hear me out. By nature, I think everything's a gimmick and there's always someone trying to make a buck.
Yeah, we're suspicious.
By nature. If I didn't know you and I never heard of a grip trigger before, I'd be like, come on, dude, trying to just get my money here. However, the grip trigger has been so unbelievably transformative to my shot. And the idea behind it of a subconscious trigger, which I would have never bought into in years past. But I was completely wrong about it. And the grip trigger has been, like I said, transformative. So I read that on purpose because when I first saw that comment, I was like, I get it, dude. Yeah, I get it. But not this time.
Talk about a curveball. That baby went like this. That was a good one, man.
I couldn't get that to you beforehand.
Yeah, that was good. And I'll comment on it. I do get the essence behind what he's saying, and I do agree with parts of it. Honestly, he might be that very few percentage of guys that has the essence of a shot without a triggered release. That's what I teach every single day in my lessons. I don't know anybody that wants to have that trigger on their bow, and I teach them not to need it. But I needed it. You need it. I asked you if you wanted me to teach you to not need it, and you goes, I don't see any reason to, Dad, and I don't see any reason for anybody not to use a trigger release either. They create a level of control, and there's a deep reasons, and we'll go into all that on an episode on its own. But your response was me like, no, I can pick up my bow after 6 months of not shooting and make good shots immediately. Do you have a comment on that, Tommy, or why you're not interested in changing and just going to use it the rest of your life?
It's not that I'm not interested in changing, but it would be a very difficult, long process for me to do. And at this point in time, I don't want to spend that much time to try to figure it out.
Honestly, you're right.
Like it honestly feels like cheating now.
For when compared to being out of control, it definitely feels like cheating because all of a sudden it works. You and I were the same thing. We're really reactive. We've got good reactions. I'm still a guy at my old advanced age can knock the soap off the thing and catch it, and like, how in the hell did I do that? I've got great reactions, which makes us more prone to these reactive things like reacting with a release link to the aim. And I'm just not going to go in that rabbit hole. I'm going to stop myself right here.
Yeah.
But the fact is, most people want the pure shot. They don't want to need it. For people who have spent decades punching out in the shot or have lost control of the string hand, man, to not give somebody a tool that can help like Joel does every single day of his life, that can get control over your shot again and give you success. The vast bulk of traditional archers have never had coaching. That's why I'm in so much demand, and found myself in this niche. I'm going to say that 90% of traditional archers, and I'm probably low on that estimate, suffer from some form of target panic, but the loss of control of the string hand is the primary reason among all that 90%.
Yeah, it's pretty common.
And the coaching that we had, the advice we had in the old days, led to this target panic and loss of control. That was the only coaching we had. And I can go into that specifically, technically, brain function reasons why. There are brain function reasons why we get into this trouble.
We should save that and do our own, its own segment on the grip trigger.
I have a whole
pretty deep topic.
It is. I have a whole 5-hour course with Solid Advanced on how to shoot without a trigger that goes deep into this. So it's a subject not for a podcast or a short conversation. But anyway, that's my basic response. I get where he's coming from, honestly. If you can shoot really well without a triggered release, honestly, that's awesome, and you are in a league of your own. But for the rest of us, like normal human beings, give us a break a little bit. How's that sound, Tommy?
Yeah, I just thought it would be kind of fun to go over.
Yeah, it is kind of fun.
All right, what was your question? Which question did you pick out?
So like a focus, that within that ad was like a focus on increasing tension. I should have reworded increasing string tension that leads to a great follow through and completion of your shot. All right. So my question here is, let me go back and find it. I got to get back on Instagram because I had to get out for a second. Where is this fella? Is that it? Yep. So a guy sent me some videos. He's shooting a clicker, and he wanted to help with slowing my back tension down, and he was asking me if she should lengthen it a little more. And I gave him a response to his videos like, no, you look like you're right on. You have a very slow, almost imperceptible move. The shots are breaking great. I could tell he was shooting an accurate shot, and I think he got it set up just right. And he said, awesome. So my next question, so should I be separated from the aim when I'm starting to pull through the clicker, right? And my response is, when you are focused on increasing tension to get through this clicker, you by default are separated from your aim. Conscious control can only go to one activity at a time. Thoughts can only be on one thing at a time. Whatever you're controlling or whatever you're thinking excludes thoughts of controlling or thinking about anything else. So he was doing it by default. Should I separate? Well, yeah, you're actually doing that, and you shot a great shot because separation happened. What he didn't realize was conscious control can only be to one thing. So yes, you consciously confirm your aim. Yep, right there. And then you proceed to increase the tension on the string that eventually gets to a click, that click eventually generates a release from the subconscious, and that arrow goes off the bow right to wherever it was pointed. Because we don't have since we don't know when the bow's going off, the brain or the reactive system in our body can't add a muscle contraction to brace for the explosion or the shock of the bow. So the arrow goes to the target unaffected by any forces. That's what we're trying to get after with a triggered release, so to speak. So the evolution of a triggered release. So you put a clicker on the bow, you can aim, maybe for the first time in a long time, and then you keep pulling, you get a click, and then you release. That's going to be a conscious release. It's not going to be accurate yet because your body's going to respond to the shock of the bow because it knows when the bow's going off. But it doesn't take the supercomputer on your shoulders to anticipate your knees like, oh, I see that every time it clicks, you release. And then all of a sudden what happens, and it happens fairly quickly, 2 to 15 shots later, what happens is you get used to this pressing back tension or pulling action, keep pulling, click, boom. And so at first it's conscious, click, and then all of a sudden brain anticipates your needs and keep pressing, and it goes click, boom. Because subconscious reactions are much faster than conscious reactions. So you can see it in the timing. Once it goes from click, boom to click, boom, I know that one's going to be accurate because that bow went off as a surprise to that fellow. That release was generated at the subconscious level related to that click. So now the brain detached from releasing on the aim. And then the next step was a detach from releasing on the click. And then it just, when we're concentrating on keep pulling, it activated the release at the subconscious based on that click. That's when accuracy starts happening. Same progression with a grip trigger. At first, you're getting the placement and getting it done, click the release, and you get a shoot, click, release, and pretty soon it's click, release, and man, that's where accuracy starts coming in. So that's the like a really flash foundational explanation of how these things work. And the guy was doing everything right. Should I separate? Yes. But you have to realize you hit by the act of pulling to get to the click, you were separated. And that's the point. At that point, the analogy I use, it becomes like driving a car. When we first drove a car, all the steering was conscious control. You're in the projectile. Projectile is not in the middle of the lane or towards the bullseye you're aiming. You're looking at the middle of the lane. You know you got to steer this way to get that way. So you press on the gas. Oh, I got to get over there. Oop, you go over here. We get to about the middle lane. You try to catch it. Maybe you're a little slow. Go past. We got to go that way. Oh, you turn the wheel and you move that way. And then maybe you catch it, but it drifts off. Oh, got to do this way. And the car, when you're a brand new driver, is wiggling down the road. Supercomputer on the brain all of a sudden anticipates your needs. And I don't know how it does it. I don't even know I'm putting words to something that is a function I can't understand. But anyway, its brain is memorizing all the neural pathways, all the muscles that make it go this way or this way. And it all of a sudden links it. It interprets we need to make those movements to coordinate with this projectile you're seeing it to be in the middle where you're looking. And then it just does it for you at the subconscious level. And we notice this. I can remember, I'm an old man. I can remember when I'm looking over the top of the steering wheel down the middle of the lane and I'm seeing all these little micro adjustments made in the steering wheel. Like, holy mackerel, that's weird. Because then I wasn't steering. It was like the steering was done for me by looking at it. And then the conscious mind hasn't tied up with this and this anymore, is free to have a deep conversation with your passenger, to have deep thoughts about something else, but consciousness can go elsewhere because the aim of the car turned into a monitoring function, a keep track of function. All I had to do is look at the middle of the lane and all the stuff happened for me. Aim is the same thing. We consciously steer that aim to the middle of the target. We look past the pin, the arrow point, or whatever your aiming method is, look at what we want to hit, and then the brain doing what it does takes care of that for you. It makes all those adjustments to the middle at a much faster rate than you can consciously, because subconscious reactions are faster than conscious reactions. And it does that for you without conscious control, which frees up conscious control to come back here and finish your shot properly. So the finish of the shot is where conscious control lies, or the keep pressing, keep pulling till we get the click or the touch to get the triggered release to go. So whatever you're consciously controlling excludes conscious control of everything else. And the problem within our shots is we put conscious control to the aim. So what happens back here is left to the subconscious. And that turns into, I'm going to use a cuss word, I'm sorry, Tommy, a shit show or target panic or other related problems.
Yeah,
So,
thinking of aiming as being more of a monitoring system
yes,
rather than something you're focused on. That along with the grip trigger, the two most revolutionary things that ever happened to my archery career, because it was the opposite of what I thought it was. Right?
Yeah,
I always wanted archery to be natural, like a smooth motion. It can't be for me. I wish it could. And I always really focused on my target when And when those two things changed, right, I got a little bit robotic. I hate it, but I love hitting the target. And when
Yes.
aiming became a more of a monitor rather than something I was intensely focusing on, it's like all of a
Correct.
sudden my arrows are finding the bullseye.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Because you were
it's
triggered
amazing.
off the click and it all came together, which is a
Yep,
beautiful thing. And this kind of shooting, there's a place for that, moving
you bet.
targets and stuff. And it's fun to shoot that. It was more fun to shoot that way. But honestly, now it's more fun to shoot this way because you're hitting the middle all the time,
Well, and that's
or
what I was going to
vast
say.
majority of the time, and that's fun.
It is fun to just look at a target and shoot and just let it all go. It's way more fun to hit the target. Way more
Yeah,
fun.
yeah.
Yeah.
And if you just shoot and
All
let it
right.
go, you're going to get worse and worse and worse. So
We have
anyway,
had some technical difficulties which pushed us back in our day a little bit too far, and I
yeah.
hate to do this, but I've got to go to wrestling practice because
And
my
I've got a
kids are
lesson
waiting for
scheduled
me.
too. I got to get to the
That's
shop. So
right.
actually, this has been a good webcast. I
That's
think there's
right.
been some good information for you guys. I hope you enjoyed it and hope you got something out of it. That's for
I
sure.
hope so too. So
Yeah.
please leave us any comments that or questions that you have. My hope is in the future that we're going to pull all of our questions off of these videos. So if you have any questions, any comments, please leave them.
Yeah.
Even if they're critical, I'll read them all. Right? This should be a little
Mhm.
bit fun, and we're normal people. We don't take ourselves too serious. So questions,
Right.
comments, please leave them. Thank you for watching. Give us a call, shoot us an email. We answer every email. I wish I could say we picked up every phone call, but when the phones are not tied up, we pick up every phone call. So
Yeah.
thank you for watching. Have a good day. We'll see you guys next week.